Hi everyone, welcome to today's event. My name is Amy Schultz and we will have Mark Levy join us later, who is an employee experience advisor, and we'll have Q&A at the end. So Mark and I look forward to answering your questions. Please keep them coming on the screen throughout today's presentation. So I come to you from my kitchen table in San Francisco, and thank you for having me in your homes today. And our homes are now doubling as our virtual office. And I don't know about you, but this whole situation of remote work and working from home has certainly taught me a lot about myself. Skills that I didn't know I had, like baking, and skills that I don't have, pet grooming. But also, it made me realize I'm a bit of a creature of habit. A lot of the way that I went about my job and how I got things done, I really relied on a lot of face-to-face interactions in the office and sort of the old kind of structure and routine that I had, which got me thinking, how can we all leave our old habits behind and really develop a greater sense of curiosity and empathy within our own teams to navigate this new world that we find ourselves in? And when I think about curiosity and empathy, I kind of break it down into the skills that we can all focus on, both the soft skills and also, some of the hard skills. And why curiosity and empathy are so important. I think curiosity opens us up to what is possible. I think a lot of us are probably mourning the things that we have lost and the things that might never be the same. But on the flip side, how can we stay open and curious about what might be possible out of this current situation? And when we're thinking about perhaps redesigning processes or policies, that's where the empathy piece is so important. In anything that we are now building, reshaping, redesigning, really making sure that empathy is front of mind and we're prioritizing the experience of both our employees and our customers and also ourselves in everything that we are designing. And so what skills are required to help us do that? So I think about the soft skills like emotional intelligence and how important it is for us to continue to develop and foster emotional intelligence within our teams. But also there are a number of technical skills that I think that we can also use this time to develop. And there was probably 3 that I wanted to spotlight today because I think remote work is really shining a light on these 3 key skills: analyzing data, being able to provide strategic advice, and then engaging employees virtually. Analyzing data. We've been talking about the importance of using data for quite some time, and why I think it is more important than ever, because we've really had to change, how we plan. When we used to plan, we probably planned either quarterly, 6 monthly, or even yearly. And now we're almost having to go back to planning day by day, week by week. And I don't know about you, but sometimes a week can even seem like a long time. And we are being hit with a lot of content and a lot of information, and we're consuming a lot of information. So how can we move from noise to signal? And how can we really leverage data in a powerful way to help us provide the strategic advice that our leaders need and also our teams need? I mean, let's be honest, there's no rule book for the situation that we find ourselves in. Some of us may have gone through the 2008 global financial crisis and even the global crisis in 2000 with the dot-com bust, but no one has ever been in this situation that we're in right now. And I think that is requiring us to be a lot more agile in how we're thinking about using data to make recommendations to provide that strategic advice. And underpinning all of that is our ability to engage employees virtually. We really need to try and meet our employees where they're at. And that might be where they're at physically, which means we need to sort of change the way we communicate and interact. That also might be where they're at emotionally. And I think that that's really important. And we're fortunate to have Mark join us later to do a sort of a double click on employee experience. Before we get to that, I wanted to spend a little bit more time then on analytics. And, the rise of analytics, people analytics is, like I mentioned, something that we have been talking about for quite some time. And in fact, 71% of companies see this as a priority right now. But on the flip side, what I find really interesting is only 9% of organizations actually believe they have a good pulse on understanding the talent drivers. So using data and insights to be able to really understand the talent drivers within their organization. We are now in a very fluid situation where we probably need to rethink where our talent is to ensure that we have the right people in the right role at the right time, because a lot of our priorities have now shifted and changed. So being able to partner effectively, if you have a people analytics team, to be able to analyze the data to understand what skills you have within your organization, to be able to make an informed talent strategy will be really, really important. So bringing it back to now our roles as managers and how can we leverage data to provide strategic advice? Firstly, collecting employee feedback to really understand how remote work is affecting them, their ability to do their job, and also their engagement. If you're in a customer-facing organization, you've probably reached out to your customers a number of times to understand how they are experiencing COVID-19, but have you done the same for your employees? At LinkedIn, we use Glint, which is a tool that we use to really understand the overall engagement of our employees. And historically, we have run pulse surveys once a quarter. And we've now sort of upped the frequency of those pulses to be monthly and focusing more on employees' experience within COVID-19. We keep them fairly simple. The last survey we asked, only 4 questions. And the last question we asked was simple, how are you doing? And it's amazing the responses that we got. And I think by really collecting the employee feedback, it enables you to more quickly make some changes, whether it be to policy or to process, to help the employees be able to do their job more effectively. At LinkedIn, we heard from our employees and we were able to make some changes to our employee leave policy to enable people to take time off if they have now young kids at home or even if they're caring for elderly parents. Secondly, as managers, I think it's really important that we pinpoint opportunities to both reskill and upskill to help boost business productivity. Like I mentioned before, now is the time to make sure that we have the right people in the right roles at the right time. And that might look totally different to perhaps what we thought it would look like at the beginning of the year. But I think now is really the opportunity where we can all learn a new skill, but making sure that, while we might not necessarily be hiring as much externally, we are really maximizing the talent that we have internally, and that might involve either needing to reskill or to upskill that talent accordingly. And that's sort of a segue into the important role that internal mobility plays to be able to support changing business priorities. You might find now that a team is absolutely maxed over capacity, and perhaps due to changing business priorities, there's a team that has a bit of excess capacity. So how can we think about being more nimble and moving our talent around? Now that might be into a totally new role, or maybe that's a short-term assignment or even a talent rotation. I think now's the time to be a little bit more creative and flexible with our talent. Bring us back to the third skill that I highlighted earlier, and that was engaging employees virtually. Now, employee experience has been something that companies have been increasingly focused on for, I would say, over the last kind of couple of years. And the reason historically for that, as you'll see on this slide, companies that focus on employee experience recognize better employee retention. They also see an uptick in employee productivity. As we know, generally, the employees that are more engaged are more productive. We're in a situation now where we have all four generations in the workforce at the same time. We've still got baby boomers in the workforce. We've got Gen X, sometimes a forgotten generation, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Millennials aren't at college anymore. Gen Z are the new generation coming into the workforce. And interestingly enough, Gen Z are probably the first generation that didn't naturally think of doing work as being physically in the office. Wherever they were working, they thought of themselves as at work. So I think companies were already starting to think about remote work options and flexible work options. And all of a sudden, here we are. That's definitely been accelerated. And lastly, companies that really prioritize employee experience are also generally a stronger talent attractor. Now, while a number of companies might not necessarily be hiring as much, there are companies that are definitely still hiring. And, unfortunately, every day we see more talented folks being laid off. And it is still a really advantageous time to secure some great talent. And so having employee experience as a priority can help you attract those talented folks. Now, when we think about employee experience, absolutely leadership is super important, and having visibility to the executive team, transparency and communication absolutely impacts an employee's trust in the organization and in the leadership, and that impacts performance. But there's one role that impacts engagement more than any other. Can you have a guess what that is? It's a manager. 70% of an individual's engagement is driven by their manager. When I hear that slide, I think, wow, how can I be of greater service to my team, given that my role as their manager has such a direct impact on their engagement, both to their work and then also just to their general well-being. So here are some tips that I've found to be helpful in helping me lead remote teams. Firstly, I reevaluated the communication tools that work best for me and my team, and I've now streamlined and I just use a couple of channels consistently. I have cut out sending emails to my team, and I use our Teams chat more frequently to either check in with the team or share more frequent updates. I think that we are all probably feeling quite overwhelmed by the amount of information and sometimes emails that come our way. So I'm finding that Teams is a more interactive, immediate way to communicate with my team, and I really enjoy the banter back and forth, because something that I'm missing about not being in the office is that kind of water cooler talk where you have those conversations perhaps with people that you might not necessarily work with day to day, but you have that banter. So I'm finding that our Teams channel is a great way to do that. We've actually introduced Water Cooler Wednesday. So each Wednesday we pose a question on our Teams chat. Some of the questions that we've asked recently, they've been popular. If you could bring back one trend from the 90s, what would it be? Or if someone could play you in a movie, who would it be? And it's so fun to see the answers go back and forth. I have also started to schedule more frequent check-ins with my team, and really trying to leave space for discussing personal situations. When I was in the office, sort of my check-ins, probably 80% of those were around discussing work in progress, which I think is normal for a lot of one-to-one interactions. But I'm finding more and more that I am really understanding how my particular member of staff is feeling that day, in that moment. And I think it's so important for me to understand how their situation may have changed since the last time we caught up. And is there anything that might be impacting their ability to prioritize work or have the capacity to do the role? So I think it's really important that we continue to have the more frequent check-ins, because now we're missing seeing each other maybe 10 times a day, but really leaving space for an employee to open up and perhaps discuss what's going on with them personally. And that might not come out in just one check-in. That might need several conversations. Lastly, and probably most importantly, I would say, it's resetting our expectations around productivity. And, I think now is not the time to try and do more, even though I think a number of people, that might be feeling insecure about their job, so feeling like they need to do more work. But I think now's the time to actually really cut back and try and do less. And so resetting our expectations and our own expectations of what productivity looks like, and really encouraging our teams to set boundaries and building buffer time. Jeff Weiner, our LinkedIn CEO, shared a post recently about the importance of scheduling buffer time. When we were in the office, we would go from meeting to meeting, but we probably had a little bit of time in between to maybe grab a coffee, have a chat to someone at the desk next to you. Now when we're home and we're on video calls all day, even if we have maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes in between our next call, we're probably using that time to look after our kids or do a household chore or feed our pet. And it means that we are constantly on. So if there's one thing I could encourage you to do after today's event, it's to schedule some buffer time and even just book a meeting with yourself and really try and use that time as me time, whether that's to go for a walk, whether that's to do some meditation, whatever works for you. We are in a marathon, not a sprint, and I think it's really important for us to take the time to look after ourselves. We've probably all cancelled holidays recently. And so I think, taking time out, taking time off. And if you're doing so, sharing that with your team to encourage them to do that also. I think now is the time that, we really need to lead from the front. And if we're showing our teams that it's okay to take time off and it's okay maybe to work less, then hopefully they will feel more comfortable in doing so. Because I read a Bloomberg article the other day that estimated we're all spending on average 3 hours longer working each day because now we don't have the commute time. So it's really important that we start taking that time back and stopping those boundaries being blurred when we're, constantly at our computer all day. I'm a fan of the stop, start, continue. So if I was to leave you with a few things that hopefully you can maybe cross off your list, because I think we all want to try and do less right now, it would be stop sticking with the tried and true. Now is the opportunity where we can rethink every step of a process as we enter this new world. An example of that, in my role as a recruiting leader, when we all moved to working from home and then afterwards shelter in place, we had to very quickly shift our recruiting process to be 100% virtual. And we did so effectively. We did it very quickly, but we probably cobbled together a bit of a process that we thought was probably only going to be short term. Now that would appear longer term. So it's a great opportunity for us to now really rethink every step of our hiring process in a virtual world to make sure that we're really optimizing for a great candidate experience. Second, stop focusing on the wrong metrics. We were probably all focusing on a lot of activity-based metrics, and I don't think that, they're sort of the right metrics to solely focus on anymore, and instead employee experience and how, your employees' engagement is, I think, will be more important metrics to follow than ever before. And stop doubting yourself. None of us, there's no rule book for the situation that we're in right now. And sometimes I think if we don't have the answers, our instinct human instinct is to sort of hide, but now's not the time to do that. Now's the time to be more visible and accessible for our teams than ever before. And it's okay not to have all the answers. And I think, being transparent and letting our teams know what we do know and what we don't know, I think that's important. And even if we do communicate something, those plans might change. And I think we all have to be okay with things being fluid and that things will change. So I think it's really important that as leaders that we need to kind of be kind to ourselves and stop doubting ourselves. Now, I took a few things off your list, but now here's a few suggestions on things that we can all start doing, or maybe we were doing these already, but they can become more of a priority. So coming back to those core skills that I think remote work is really shining a light on right now, and that is analyzing data and turning it into insights. Data only becomes insights when it comes with a recommendation. And in order for us to provide strategic advice to our business leaders, we need to recommend and come to them with solutions. And we may be able to do that, but there's something often that's blocked us in the past. And I think a lot of that is confidence. So right now we do need to be confident in making recommendations, albeit those recommendations might need to change a week or month later, and that's okay. But really now's the time to lead with data and really help move from noise to signal. Putting ourselves in our employees' shoes. I always used to say you never knew what someone went through on their way to work and then what they went home to at the end of the day. Now we're in a situation where whatever situation we're in it all day. So really trying to put ourselves in our employees' shoes and humanizing our communication at every point. I think the role, the partnership that we can have with our internal comms team is so important, and really making sure that we're sort of scrubbing a lot of the messages and tools that we used before to make sure that they are really helping to meet our employees where they are and addressing their needs. And I think coming back to empathy, really having empathy and also a sense of curiosity to help put ourselves in our employees' shoes. And I think Mark will have some great tips on that very shortly. And lastly, I mentioned empathy. When we released our global talent trends earlier this year, empathy was an absolutely underlying theme across it all. So, more and more, I think companies have been having a more human-centered approach to how they operate business. But I think right now it's a time to really seek to understand and apply that growth mindset. We need to leave those old habits behind, and it's okay to mourn some of those, but really think about the future. And I think, I'm sure no one on this call, if you went back and looked at what was a priority or what was in your plan in January to what you're focusing on in May, I doubt many of us are focusing on that same thing. So really thinking about how we as leaders can apply that growth mindset and be empathetic to what our employees and our customers and also just our community is going through. I think that will make us all more effective leaders and hopefully enable us as well as our teams to navigate this new world of work. So to go a little bit deeper now into the concept of employee experience, I would love to welcome Mark Levy onto the call. Hey, Mark.
Hi, Amy. Great presentation. Really learned a lot.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's so nice to have you here, and I appreciate you spending some time with us all. And you and I have had many interesting discussions over the past few weeks, Mark. And with this sudden change in the workplace, how do you see HR shifting towards this new concept of employee experience, and particularly around the idea of co-creation with employees? Can you sort of share with us all a little bit more about how that got started?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And we had started planning this long ago before the pandemic hit, and supposed to be in the studio together. Instead, I'm in my office. I have my daughter working remotely in e-commerce. She should be in New York. I have a son, Sam, who's studying remotely from Rhode Island School of Design. My wife is teaching virtual yoga downstairs. So
Wow.
Totally different situation.
Totally different.
The thing I think employee experience and the shift that I'll talk about is even more important now with employees working remotely and so much uncertainty in the workplace. So to answer your question, how it started, late 2013, I was interviewing for a job at Airbnb and had the pleasure of meeting Brian Chesky. He's an incredible human being and leader. New in his role, new to leading a company of that size, disrupting the travel industry. And I remember he said to me, what do you think about coming to a company where we're going to change the world? And a lot of the Silicon Valley folks said that, but he really meant it in a very dear way. And he also let me know that he didn't know much about HR, but everything he'd heard about it, he really didn't like.
Huh.
So he had just written a Medium article that was entitled "Don't Fuck Up the Culture," and essentially he told me that's what he wanted me to focus on. That he and Joe and Nate had started the company and really from the beginnings were designing the type of workplace that they wanted and figuring out a way to curate that. When I arrived, they were at about 500 people, and it was all about scale. And so in the conversation with him, I said, okay, well, how do we work this out? And he said, there's a lot of people that are focused on the employee right now, but they're reporting into different places. And I'd love you to figure out who they are, what they're doing, and let's bring them all together in a new way. And so I said, okay, we're clearly not going to call it HR. So let's think about something new. And basically I said, you have a customer experience team, CX, that's focused on the customer. Why wouldn't we have an EX team that's focused on the employee? And if you treat the employee in the same way you want them to treat the customer, it's more than likely you're going to end up delivering on your customer promise.
So true.
So that's how it started. And then it's been interesting, and I've seen on LinkedIn, there's some great statistics about the number of jobs and job titles that are focused on employee experience, and it's definitely in the 50, 100,000 already, and that started 2013. The way I've defined it, as people have asked, looking at Airbnb as kind of the pioneers, is really three things. The first is around a mindset shift. And that shift is around doing things with and for your employees, not to them. The second is ways of working, which is really all about co-creation, which you talked about earlier and has become more and more important through the shifts in the way we're working remotely and the uncertainties of the workplace, et cetera. And if you listen to your employees the same way that you listen to your customers, it's going to be a great way to make sure the customer promise is delivered. At Airbnb, our mission was to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. And our EX strategy then became, how do we create a place where people feel like they belong so that they can help our hosts to deliver belonging in their homes? So that connection between inside and outside is really critical. And then co-creation and prioritization and designing the programs all becomes something you do together. And then finally, is the third thing is organization. So this shift to EX and the EX organization is a lot bigger and broader of a remit than the traditional HR organization was. It includes all of those functions, but it includes a lot of other things. And kind of most notably, when I arrived at Airbnb, was a group called Ground Control. And they were kind of a self-organized group that were doing very operational, very important roles, but they created this way to think about their roles through delivering the culture, through bringing the culture to life.
Nice.
And I always called Ground Control the secret sauce at Airbnb. They were the glue that held the place together, and they continue to do so. And I've had some conversations with them over the last few weeks, and I have to say my heart goes out to them and all of the Airbnb family. They just announced layoffs of 25% of their workforce. And I'll tell you that from 500 when I started to, I think they were close to 7,000 recently, and now they'll take it down. the reason why they've become, or they've continued to be, such a great place to work and such a big-hearted company and such a mission-driven place is because of how ground control brought the mission and culture to life. And so I'm hoping that some of the listeners will be able to figure out how they can hire some of these amazing people that unfortunately aren't going to be able to work there anymore. The other areas in employee experience other than ground control, which is about internal comms, about the workplace, around employee recognition, celebration, events, and most importantly, the mission and values, are areas like food, facilities, safety, security, environments, as well as newer things such as wellness and very importantly, social impact and volunteering. But that's a very long-winded answer of kind of what is this shift to employee experience, mindset, ways of working in organization.
Well, thank you, Mark. I think, like a good Marvel story, everything has an origin story. So I really appreciate you stepping us through, and also, I think all of our hearts go out to the Airbnb folks that were laid off, and I love the call to action of people to think about how we could hire them. And I'm sure a number of us also have ground control to Major Tom, well. So, Mark, you touched on sort of the different work environments, and with now our teams being so spread apart, it might be difficult, for us all to maintain sort of that sense of togetherness that we used to experience in the workplace where we were all physically together. Could you share some tips with us for cultivating and maintaining company culture with remote teams?
Sure. Well, let's start by defining culture. The way we did that was to talk about it being the behaviors, the shared behaviors in an organization. Ben Horowitz recently put out a book, and the title says it all, which is "What You Do Is Who You Are." Here, not that I'm selling it for him, but a really, really good read, and important because your culture is what you cultivate when you're together, but now it is how it's going to hold you together while you're apart. And I believe that the culture should start, if you're intentional, with the mission and values, and those get translated into behaviors, and then that becomes the way in which decisions are made, the way people know how to hold each other accountable. And my suggestion is it's authentic. They're tied to the business, and they create the trust and connection across the organization. And as I mentioned, at Airbnb, our mission was around belonging, and we defined belonging as creating connections. And so I think that is a great lesson for all of us in how do you create these connections, which then defines your culture, and then how do those connections get continued, and how do you perpetuate them, particularly through this work from home time. And so there's kind of four major connections that we talked about. The first being the connection between the company and the employee, and the employees and the company. And you talked a lot about how to make sure that comes to life through the leadership, through the managers, and particularly these days, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. And then how do you create the information sharing and the two-way dialogue so that the ability to know what's going on and the ability to feel connected and be able to participate is there for employees, so there's engagement and productivity and the ability to deliver on the business. The second connection is how do you keep employees connected across the organization? So clearly it starts with the manager and their direct report, the team that you work on, and then it stems to cross-functional teams.
Yes.
And even more importantly now than ever is how do you create people connected across your friends. Gallup had a Q12. There's only 12 questions, and one of them, do you have a best friend at work? And that's lost if you're in meetings all day and you don't see each other in the hallway or get to have lunch together. So ways to keep people connected to each other is also really important. The third connection is around your customers, making sure that there's ways that employees can stay in touch with and know how the company customers are feeling, get their feedback, and bring it back in the loop. And then finally, how do you connect your employees to the communities in which you operate? I learned back at Levi's and Gap the importance of encouraging your employees to give back.
Yes.
And what I found is the profound impact that it makes on an individual because of the pride that they have that their company is willing to give them time to get out and give back, but also the impact it has on the employee brand as well as the communities in which you operate.
Totally agree. Yeah, and the ability to have an impact and feel like you're doing meaningful work, Mark, I think is so important right now when so much sort of feels like out of our control.
Yeah. So a couple other things now that we're working from home, and you mentioned this earlier, really important to key in on all of the levels in the organization. So we talked about the 4 different connections, but if you think about the employee and the manager, and it sounds like you're doing a great job with your team, to focus on how you recraft that one-on-one. What are you talking about? How often do you have it? And are you diving deep both into the emotional side of things as well as the productivity side of things? Teams, how are you keeping your team connected, you as a leader to the team, but also the team with each other? Functions and departments need to understand as things are shifting, what's important, what's no longer important or deprioritized. And then what I've found in working with a number of my clients right now is how do you continue to keep the entire place unified? And how do you bring that group together and share what's going on? And one thing I've seen at a few companies is that all hands is coming live from different leaders' homes, so you can kind of see where they are and be introduced to their pets or their partner.
Yes.
And different ways, but not forgetting that it's all of those levels in the organization that we need to stay focused on. And I guess a couple of practical tips that I'd say. The first is the adage that in the absence of information, people make shit up.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, look at what we're all trying to figure out. There's no answers. We've never been through this before, and there's so many people who are coming up with different ideas. Is it 1 strain? Is it 2 strain? Testing, not testing? Whatever it is. So there's no such thing as over communicating right now. I mean, I really feel like we have to share, and you did a good job earlier of sharing. We may not have all the answers, but here's what we know as of now. Things may change tomorrow, but constantly providing people with information. And then on the opposite of that side is really doing a good job of active listening. Leaving time at the beginning of any interaction, whether it's your one-on-one or a team meeting, to check in on how are people doing. And also to remember that it's harder when you're remote, and some people are comfortable on video, some people aren't, to figure out a way to include everyone and to make sure people are comfortable to be sharing. And it's also really important and to be intentional about two-way dialogue. So you mentioned pulse surveys, Glint, Culture Amp, others do a great job of giving you the opportunity to have ongoing, and probably what you need is more frequent right now. The other thing is Q&A. So anytime that you have a team meeting or an all hands, make sure you leave time for Q&A, have a running Q&A, have FAQs for people who didn't get to attend or be able to watch because the time zones or whatever. But that two-way dialogue is super important. The other, I guess, 2 things I'd say answering this question around how we handle remote workforce. One is continue to celebrate victories and personal milestones. Nice. I have a great story about my daughter who works for West Elm in e-commerce, and her birthday is March 21st. So it was shortly after everyone headed for the hills and we were working remotely. And she was just glowing after she got off this Zoom call. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I went to this regularly scheduled Zoom call, and when I got there, everyone was holding a cocktail, and it turned out they were celebrating my birthday.
Oh, that's
so cool. And then she's like, but my manager's birthday is next week, and I'm going to make it even more special. So she figured out a way to deliver breakfast to her manager's apartment in New York City, 9:30 on Monday morning. And everyone who was on the call that started at that time was in their bed, in their pajamas. So they had a breakfast in bed party for her manager's birthday.
So fun.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'd say, and you mentioned this earlier, is how do you replace the water cooler?
Yeah.
And you can do that through Teams or Slack, or what I've seen a lot of people do is have kind of Zoom meetings or fireside chats or workshops or whatever that are bringing people together that are like-minded or have similar things going on in their lives. So I've heard one that was for parents that was about what are you doing to teach your kids? And I heard one for parents that was just about bitching about how hard it is to work and have the kids at home.
Huh.
I've heard some about what are you binge watching? What recipes would you share? What tasty takeouts are you finding? Another thing is if you've got employee resource groups, definitely figure out a way to keep them to continue because those are so important in the workplace. And when you're out and separated, figure out ways to keep them to keep connected and to be able to keep that movement going and to both create connections between them, but also to continue to create allies and educate the organization on what's going on relative to their situation. And then contests and creativity. I've heard everything from virtual background contests,
Yes,
wear your favorite hat, and then virtual learning and fireside chats. Also, don't forget about the fact that there's still people that need to learn and grow, and it's not all just about meetings and trying to figure out how to save the business.
totally. Thank you, Mark. Like, I bet people were madly writing notes. Than I was, and I love the way you broke down the different connections. And I think, you know, if there's anything that we take away from this is, as humans, you know, we need to connect, and the value of relationships, I think, you know, are more important than ever. So I really appreciated the way that you broke those down. And Mark, you spoke also a lot about the importance of communication. And, you know, over the last couple of months, I think I have a newfound appreciation for our internal communications team.
Yeah.
And, you know, internal comms is really core, I think, to preserving employee morale and ensuring that employees feel confident, supported, and engaged, which you touched on the importance of that just now. So how do you see this activity and function evolving, Mark, and getting more integrated with employees? Because perhaps, you know, before it was sort of a lot of that team was kind of working in the background, but I feel like right now employee comms, internal comms is sort of up in the spotlight.
Yes, definitely. In fact, last week I was supposed to be in Berlin speaking at an internal comms conference sponsored by Staffbase. It was a virtual conference, but again, when I started to work on the presentation, it was pretty broad. And by the time I was speaking last week virtually to 1,000 people around the world, it was much more focused on the importance of internal comms now and the importance of internal comms in this shift towards employee experience. And as I mentioned, it's not a one-way thing. It's around creating two-way dialogue and the ways to give and get information. And one of the things I'd say is it doesn't matter where the internal comms function sits. At Airbnb, it was in the EX function, but at Peloton, who I'm working with right now, it sits within marketing. And I did some work with Barry Cullibo in Europe, and there it sat in a separate just comms department. But regardless of where it sits, there needs to be a close connection to the employee experience or HR team, because it's so important to understand the context and to be close to the customer or the employee. The other thing I'd say is it is not just the internal comms people's role. You know, it's got to be from the top down and from the bottom up. And as we mentioned earlier, both you and I, it's not just leadership, but it's really important to have it sit and be an important part of how the manager is communicating with their teams. Some principles that we should be considering right now, and we mentioned this earlier, is how do you balance the emotional, you know, what's going on with the person, and the practical, what's going on with the business.
Yes.
Nothing's going to get done until your employees feel safe and secure and they're trusting of you. As Josh Bershin mentioned in a recent blog post that he did, it's got to start with the people and the business will follow. He did a great article called The Big Reset, worthwhile reading about all the different components that we're thinking about are shifting based on what's going on with this pandemic. In addition to balancing, I'd say make sure that there's clarity and a deeper understanding. You need to really understand and be sure that you share what and why. The context and all of that is much more important now because people are really curious, and also there's just so much uncertainty. Thirdly, I'd say is around personalization. And that is everyone's starting in a different place, right? It starts with, are you a healthy individual, or do you have a compromised immunity system? Are you old and healthy, or are you young and potentially vulnerable? There's your living situation, and we're all kind of going through this. You and I had a good chat about this. You're at home with your dog, and I'm here with 4 people, a dog, and everyone's doing different things, and you're probably feeling isolated, and I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So no one's winning and no one's losing in this game. Parents are now teachers. Some of us are also having to take care of our pets or our elder parents or grandparents. Some of us are cramped, and some of us are fortunate to have a place to call an office. And then there's also the challenge that everyone's having with Wi-Fi. So
Yeah.
personalization is important. It's no longer a one size fits all. And then you use these words, I had them written down as well as my talking points, but meet them where they are. Help your employees to learn how to navigate through the many ways in which companies are communicating. And so what's the best use of email? How do you make it more frictionless? How do you move some of that out into better, more efficient ways of communicating? You mentioned Teams or Slack. You can have channels in those that are going to take a lot of the noise out of the system and let people really focus on driving the business, but still have a place to go to learn about recipes or wellness or teaching. The use of video conference is crazy right now, and it can be really effective. But I've also heard from a lot of people that they're really sick of seeing themselves, and they're a little self-aware and a little bit concerned in the morning or maybe late in the day about what they look like. So be respectful if someone wants to turn off their screen for a little while.
Yeah.
And also, let's not forget the telephone, the old tool we used to use. And then finally, set some boundaries. And you talked about this, in which it's a great idea. Some people are really good with structure, and some people are really bad at it. And so those people we really need to help. My daughter was telling me that at West Elm, they've created a block of time between 12 and 1 Eastern, which happens to be 9 and 10 here, for lunch, so that everyone at least has a time to be able to go do what they need to do. I mentioned I'm consulting with Peloton, and I was suggesting to them that they make sure they block time to get on their bike or do one of their workouts. It's great. They're 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. You can definitely get one in and get back and be sweaty and turn off your video, and no one will even know.
That's nice.
And then the last thing I'd say is to really make sure you try to schedule recurring meetings or give people enough advance notice when you're bringing people together so they can arrange what they need to do, whether it's teaching or serving a meal to their family around those things, and try to create some predictability in this time of uncertainty.
Yes, I think that's sort of what we're all sort of trying to hold on to, just those things that we can predict and control. Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah. I learned so much then, and we've had great engagement on the stream with questions. So if you're game, we might just jump into some Q&A now, Mark.
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So the first question we have here is around hiring, actually. So I'm called to take this one.
Better you than me.
Well, you say that now. So the question is, for companies that are hiring right now, all of their candidate engagement, interviewing, hiring, and even onboarding is entirely virtual. How do you anticipate recruiting teams will evolve because of this once we're back to normal? Thank you to everyone on the stream who answered that question. I don't know if we'll go back to normal, but it will be a new normal. And, when we first sort of shifted our recruiting process at LinkedIn to virtual, we had to do that very quickly, almost overnight. And I think when we did it, we thought it was going to be just for the short term, but that is now looking a lot longer. Even if we go back to the office, candidates might not feel comfortable always coming on site for interviews. So I think, recruiting teams will really need to think about what is the candidate experience that we want to create in a virtual environment. I've heard of different companies starting to think about virtual reality technology so they can be giving, candidates tours of the office that maybe they did that in person before. And, Mark, you talked about the importance of personalizing communication. I think even if we are running like virtual hiring processes, the importance of recruiting teams personalizing communication. Like I've had recruiters share recipes with candidates. They may not have done that before, but we're all in this situation, right? And when we first moved to remote interviews, we had a number of candidates that were worried that, oh, like my house is messy, I've got kids, I've got a dog, like I don't want to come across as not professional. And I think, our role is to put people at ease and explain we're all in the same boat, and and I think kind of reset our expectations. So they're just a few sort of ways that I think that recruiting teams will need to continue to evolve, and things that, just again, sort of thinking about having empathy and also curiosity and growth mindset top of mind.
The other interesting thing you and I talked about the other day was also how the candidate pool has now become practically the entire world.
Totally.
That with the shift towards working from home and whatever the new reset looks like, it's no longer a situation where you need to either find someone in a city or someone you can afford to relocate a city if there's going to be more and more jobs that are open to being virtual.
Yes, we did talk about that, Mark, and I'm personally, so excited by that. And I think especially when we want to continue to, improve the diverse representation of our organizations. And I think, yes, now being able to perhaps tap into talent that are in other locations and cities, and, then I guess the evolving role of the recruiter in being able to use data to help influence a hiring manager to rethink, where a different candidate pool might be rather than those traditional locations. So, yeah, I think that is definitely something I think that we will benefit from in recruiting in the future. Looking at the next question on the stream, Mark, this one might be a good one for you. What are the creative ways you're seeing technology being used to not only keep employees connected, but also teach employees new skills?
Great. Well, let's start with Zoom, which is now a verb.
Yes. Oh, I know my dad's like, I Zoomed today. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, we tried to have a birthday celebration for my mom, and all we saw was the top of my dad's forehead in the Zoom. So there's definitely some work to be done there. But the importance certainly of video conferencing has never been the same, and making sure we don't just replace the back-to-back meetings which were in person with now the back-to-back meetings that are on Zoom, because that's just not effective. So that's one call out that I've seen a lot of companies is just shift that and not really think through how you can be more efficient and effective throughout the day. As mentioned earlier, Teams and Slack can be used for many different ways, both to take some of the noise out of the system, but also to get a lot of work done. I'm working with a company called Boom, which is building the next supersonic jet. Oh, and wow. They've got people that are back in the hangar building the plane, but only the essential folks just to keep safety going. So they've got people in the hangar and then people at home, and they're using Slack and Teams as a way to make sure they're constantly staying in touch with what's going on and how to make sure that they're putting the right foot before the left foot. And another interesting way that I've seen Teams or Slack being used is with alumni. So many companies now are having to have the unfortunate situation where they're having to lay people off. Airbnb has a very strong alumni Slack channel, and we've been welcoming people so they still feel like they belong. And we've also been helping them to figure out how to make connections to get some job potential information. So that's a second way. Relative to engagement, you mentioned Glint. I've worked with other companies like Culture Amp. More regular, more focused pulse surveys is a great way to get to know how people are feeling about both where they are relative to their safety, the security, the uncertainty, and also getting work done is super important. From a communication standpoint, a lot of companies have intranets. Some are using technology like Staffbase. which is more than internet. It's more of a hub. It allows the give and get of information. And then we're also kind of suffering with not being able to get to the gym, or some of us even to get outside, depending on what's going on with the climate or the shelter-in-place requirements. So from a wellness standpoint, I mentioned I'm doing work with Peloton. They've given free access for 90 days to their One Peloton app, and it's amazing.
Right.
There's another company that I've done some work with called TaskHuman that is creating on-demand ability for you to get whatever type of wellness solution that you need, whether it's self-care, physical fitness, healthy eating, mindfulness, mental health, physical therapy. It's all there. So there's a lot of technology that's being used both to help you with your work, but also to help you keep connected.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? How just how quickly different companies are pivoting to, to either create new technology or leverage technology in a different way to really help people either navigate sort of work physically or emotionally.
Yeah.
So that's so cool. And the alumni idea, like that's such a great, easy kind of thing to leverage right now, because I'm sure most organizations have an alumni program. So how are we thinking about leveraging that in situations where there are layoffs? It's a great tip. We probably have time for maybe one or two more questions. This one's a good one, Mark. Despite this new shift in work, there may still be some doubt that employees can effectively get their work done in remote environments. How can companies change their mindset on remote work to instill more trust in their employees in this virtual environment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And when all this was shifting, I was really curious to see what was going to happen, because I have worked for a lot of big-hearted companies, but I've worked for some small-minded leaders who have really said, if you're not here, how do I know you're working? If you're not here, how are you getting anything done? And it just was super unrealistic.
Yeah.
And what I'm really excited to see in a lot of the companies that I'm working with and people that I've spoken to is that they've admitted that they're shocked, but surprised and pleasantly happy that this work from home thing is really something that has not gotten in the way of them being effective and efficient and creating connections and getting the work done. So I think it's here to stay, and I think that it's now going to be this hybrid of both what's the reinvention of what the office is, who needs to be there and how often and when you're there for what purpose, and then how do you give more flexibility to your employees. One thing you mentioned earlier was shifting what you're focused on, what you're measuring. And it has got to be much more about the what than the how or the how long.
Yes.
And a lot of that has come based on this idea that, wow, I don't have someone sitting underneath me. I don't have to be on top of them, and the work's still getting done. That's amazing. I read yesterday that Warren Buffett at his virtual Berkshire Hathaway conference mentioned that he sees more people working from home and working remotely. And if a 90-year-old seeing it that way, I think we can all understand that this is a shift that's here to stay. And I think what we'll have to focus on really is more flexibility, particularly for those who have long commutes or their commute's going to be challenged, like in New York with the subway, which is not running in a way that's safe yet. Less scheduled meetings and more time to have space to put your head down. We had no meetings Wednesday at Airbnb that we tried. On that day, it's an easier day for people not to necessarily have to be in the office and be able to work from home. A shift in how much real estate people are going to really need, or what you have, how it's going to be shifted. And that could help you with how you might focus on the need for social distancing once we can get back to work.
Oh, great tips. Thank you, Mark. And, and it just really does kind of open up what might be possible, and just rethinking, like even that, no meetings Wednesday, those sort of concepts of perhaps regular days where we don't necessarily need to be in the office. Like I think everything's sort of on the table now.
And what you might need to do is rotate that based on different functions, and you could still then have the same office space, but have the social distance and have a way you connect, and then a way you can be home and get work done.
Yeah, I think
exciting.
seems to be piloting that. So it'll be interesting to see how that concept of almost teams, team A, operates. We've probably got time for one last question. And let's see, we've got, with this change and shift in the workplace, what skills do you think will be important and rise to the top? You know, how can we as leaders start preparing and learning these new skills? I'm happy to take that one.
I'll let you take that.
Mark, thank you. You know, I mentioned, you know, earlier sort of the skills of analysing data, providing strategic advice and engaging employees virtually are obviously all really core. And I think on top of that, resilience and adaptability, I think, will be really fundamental to how we continue to navigate this new world of work. And you know, when I reflect on our global talent trends that we released earlier this year, internal hiring was actually one of the key trends that we highlighted. And I think, you know, more than ever, companies are going to be looking within to find the talent they need to fill business critical roles or projects. So I think that will continue to be a shift. So we as leaders need to really have a pulse on the talent within and also the talent within our organizations to be able to have the right people in the right roles for the right times. So the time is up. My goodness, Mark. Time has certainly flown by. Thank you so much for your time and insights today. You know, I learned a ton, and I'm sure everyone on the stream did as well.
Thank you, and I learned a ton from you as well. And next time, let's do it when we can get together.
Yes, let's get this show back, this gang back together, hopefully in person. Thank you all so much for joining us today. You know, please do keep an eye out on LinkedIn, you know, on the feed, and also our editors are constantly sharing, you know, news and also learning resources on, you know, working remotely. So we will continue to share information to help us all. You know, we are all in it together. Please stay well, stay safe, and catch you next time.